Welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. The House of Representatives resumed plenary during the week briefly to attend to some important legislations intended to aid the fight against terrorism and corruption. They include the Terrorism Prevention Act and the Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Bill. Now, these are proposed legislations from the executive and have already been passed by the Senate and require accelerated passage by the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives convened an urgent plenary session on Tuesday, May 3rd, to handle some legislative businesses. The House had adjourned plenary to allow for the rehabilitation of its chamber. During Tuesday's plenary session, a lawmaker raised a motion of urgent public importance, drawing the attention of the House to the recent arrest of a member from Rivers State by the state government.
Deeply worried, Mr. Speaker, that no investigation was done to validate all allegations of crime before the arraignment of Honorable Dr. Farah Dagogo in a magistrate court on Friday, 29 April 2022.
I don't know what we want.
A point of order was then raised by the PDP caucus leader, who is also from Rivers State, urging the House not to consider the motion.
I will plead and urge this House that we step this matter down. One, it is not in tandem with our rules. Two, in the spirit of proper reconciliation, I think that the caucus will even have cause to reach the leadership of the House if we cannot manage the issues.
You may have a point, but at the same time, we have to be careful that when matters affect anybody out there, a member, a non-member, we do not reduce it to a caucus thing.
My brother, my colleague who took this motion, has given us hearsay. He was not at the scene. He did not witness any of the incidents. Mr. Speaker, about 8 members here were at the scene of this incident on the day of the screening for National Assembly members. And that was why I cautioned that this matter should be allowed to be resolved amicably. We were all at that scene, and there was arrangement to throw dynamite at the scene.
Others were there.
The Speaker doused the tension, and the motion was adopted.
What you are saying now may be prejudicial to get that dynamite and all of that. But your point has been made that he was not there. Others were there. So there's another side to the story is what you're saying. And that point is very clear. You may be right. He may be right. I don't know. Even about the dynamite, I don't know if you are right or wrong. Nobody knows.
Yes, sir, but
those in favor of the matter that the matter be referred to leadership, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. Ayes have it.
Honorable Farah Dagogo was arrested by the police after he was declared wanted by Rivers State Governor Nyesom Wike on the 28th of April for allegedly hiring cultists who stormed the PDP secretariat in Port Harcourt and disrupted the screening of aspirants. Afterwards, the House settled down to the main business for which the emergency session was convened: the consideration and passage of 4 critical executive bills to aid the fight against terrorism and corruption. They include a bill to repeal the Terrorism Prevention Act 2011 and Terrorism Prevention Act 2013, and enact the Terrorism Prohibition and Prevention Bill 2022 to provide for, among others, criminalization of terrorism and kidnapping in the country. A bill to repeal the Money Laundering Prohibition Act 2011 as amended and enact the Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Bill to establish the Special Control Unit under the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. A bill for an act to provide a framework for the support, management and protection of witnesses who provide information, evidence or any other assistance to law enforcement agencies during inquiries, investigations or prosecution. And a bill for an act to repeal the Public Complaints Commission Act 2004 and enact the Public Complaints Commission Bill 2022 to expand the scope and powers of the Commission. The executive bills were speedily passed through first, second, and third reading. The National Assembly extended the implementation of the 2021 Appropriation Act from 31st March to 31st May 2022. Now, according to the upper chamber, the extension was approved in view of a need to complete ongoing projects nearing completion. However, financial analysts are concerned that extending the implementation of national budgets makes for a confusing budget cycle and is a distortion of the budget calendar. Now, in this report, we examine some of the issues affecting the strict adherence of implementing the capital component of the national budget.
On the 5th of April, the National Assembly extended the implementation of the 2021 budget from 31st March to 31st May 2022. This is not the first time Parliament is extending a budget cycle. In the past, the National Assembly passed prior appropriation acts mid-year, with their implementation usually extended to the following year. However, the 9th National Assembly successfully returned the country to a January to December budget cycle. Although the National Assembly has sustained this practice in the last 2 years, it recently extended the implementation of the capital component of the 2021 budget to May 31st, 2022, to run concurrently with the 2022 budget.
Don't forget that we passed 2 budgets last year. There was a supplementary budget that was passed to address the issue of insecurity. And we felt that for us to have a proper implementation of this budget, that the provision has been, instead of mopping up this fund, and all the processes that we have started on now resulted into our completed project, we deem it fit that at least this extension of this budget will go on, while the implementation of 2022 budget, once it is amended by the National Assembly, can, continue pari passu.
But maintaining a strict one-year budget cycle will be impossible without adequate revenue to fund the budget, which has been a fundamental challenge. The national budget is at a deficit of 7.35 trillion naira, and this is coming at a time of revenue shortfalls from the petroleum sector, with a reduction in the number of barrels of crude oil produced per day lost to oil theft. The alarming jump of petroleum subsidy from 442.72 billion naira earmarked in the 2022 budget January to June to 4 trillion naira is also noteworthy.
We never planned for this astronomical increase in subsidy. We projected for 442 billion in the budget, but they have approached us that there is no way we can meet except if we are going to remove the subsidy regime, which we believe it is not good for us as a nation now. And as we speak, the subsidy has grew to about 4-point-something trillion naira, which the president is asking the National Assembly that there is need for us to rework this budget so that at least it can reflect the current situation and realities that is on ground before us. So to a large extent, I strongly believe that these are measures that we can do, and thank God for the increase in oil prices in the international market, which has given us the opening to increase the benchmark from $62 to about $73. I believe these are right steps in the right direction that we can still maneuver.
Blocking leakages and reducing the cost of governance are some of the ways financial experts suggest to increase revenue. The nation is grappling with a huge deficit in the 2022 budget, revenue shortages and an expenditure of 4 trillion naira to fund petrol subsidy in 2022. Economic analysts want robust interactions between the executive and the legislature to find solutions to these problems and build consensus before the next budget is presented to the National Assembly.
In the report we just showed, we interviewed the chairman, Senate Committee on Finance, Senator Solomon Adiola, to understand the reason for extending the implementation of the 2021 budget till May this year. We also had a chat with a macroeconomic and public policy analyst, Professor Kenife, to further discuss this issue, as well as the problem of revenue shortfalls in funding national budgets.
Revenue underperformance. Because if the revenue was there was no reason why we shouldn't have spent them. I mean, I go around the ministries and they're telling me that they are still waiting for the first quarter release for capital expenditure. And they say, well, even if we get any, it may be about 15% or 20%, when it should be about 35, 30, but it's not. It's revenue underperformance.
Professor Kenife, what do you think are some of the most critical actions which government should take to ramp up revenue in the country?
There are 2 ways. You raise revenue by plugging the holes, the leakages, and by reducing some of the things you spend money on, for example, subsidy. Explain to me, why would you use 4 trillion naira as subsidy for consumption? You don't subsidize consumption. What you subsidize is production, so that you can create the jobs and keep the jobs here. You can subsidize productive activity so that manufacturing and value addition can take place here. And I would say, rather than spend 4 trillion on petroleum subsidy, give 1 trillion of it to agriculture. These farmers are working under extreme conditions to produce food, and we are feeding 300 million people, not 200, because we are feeding the Francophone countries in the northern frontiers. That's where you should put the money, to let them hold the job. There's so many odds against the farmers, and 80% of these farmers that are growing our crops are women. According to Africa Union Malabo Declaration 2014, 80% are women. Primary produce, the one we eat, 80% of the processing of primary produce like gari and other are done by women, and 80% of marketing in rural areas and market are done by women. And yet they can't go out to the farm to plant or to even harvest their crops because of pervasive insecurity. And then where you now have to use intensive mechanization, like the Ankoboro was done, then bring some subsidy into it. Because if somebody buys 4 bags of NPK per hectare, then give them free seed, rice seed or maize seed, 4 kg packets of, let them be free, so that they can reduce their exposure, reduce their costs. Why does the European Union refuse to put subsidy on the table? Because they are subsidizing their primary production, agriculture. The moment they mention subsidy, the removal of subsidy, all the farmers will be out on the street and they'll stop government, especially in France. So they know what they're doing. So why would we be doing the opposite? You are funding, today you say it's 30 million barrels a day. Now it's no longer 30 million, it's 40 million, it's now 70 million. And then you say the subsidy is 1.2 trillion. Before we look at it, it's now 4 trillion. I mean, that can't go on like that. And what I say is this. NNPC has now become a corporate limited company. Okay. What we need to do now is to go and value the assets of NNPC and then take NNPC to the capital market. When Saudi Arabia needed $25 billion, they didn't go to IMF and World Bank. They said, tell me the value of Saudi Aramco. And they told them that is after valuations about 1.5 trillion. Say, oh no, I want 5%, sell 5%. And they got the money. What does that say? Let's shift the story to equity issuance. Let's move that way instead of debt financing. And what it means in effect is that I reckon, by my own calculation, that based on 1.7 million barrels a day, NNPC as a going concern could be valued at about 20 trillion naira. And when you add the gas assets and then add the physical assets of NNPC across the country, and maybe abroad as well, you will find that it will not be worth anything less than 30 trillion naira. So if we can establish the actual value of NNPC and it goes to capital market, let government say 50% or 49%. That will give government over 15 trillion to reduce the quantum of debt that we are leaving behind. That's very important. But what is even more important is efficiency. What will happen is that all the oil companies will come to buy shares. Everybody, small and big and large, will come out to buy shares. And they will not stand and look at NNPC to conduct business the way they are conducting business. Have we had any issues with the NLNG? Oil companies are in that business, so they know what they know. And then government is getting their dividend. They too are getting their dividend. That is what will happen when private sector enter into the fray to own assets of NNPC. They will not let NNPC do what they are doing. They will get world-class management, and then they will make sure that every 6 months our government gets income, and not turn to government and say, go and find 4 trillion budget money to pay revenue. They will make sure that they do what needs to be done. You will not be hearing all this story about the bunkering of fuel, crude, and all those things will go, because these are the indigenous there. will be buying shares, and you will not own share and then run down the company. That is my own candid view. Otherwise, we are just in catch-22 situation.
We continue with the discussion on the challenges with the national budget, this time with business manager, Nigerian Economic Society, Dr. Tefa Abraham.
Budget in Nigeria, and like many other countries, is based on expected revenue. So for the fact that budget has been passed does not mean the entire 1 trillion needed for defense or for works and housing is readily available. So Federal Ministry of Finance keeps aggregating all the revenue that is accruable to the federal government. We have the revenue that is accruable to the entire federation. After it has been shared, the one that goes to federal government is what concerns us at the federal level, the federally retained revenue. It comes from value-added tax, it comes from share of federal government earnings from consolidated revenue fund. All these things takes time to accrue to the federal government and to process them to make them readily available for MDAs. So releases for MDAs capital expenditure or project rather is done periodically, either on monthly basis or on quarterly basis. So if you study the Office of Accountant General of the Federation's report, you see that releases are done on quarterly basis. In some quarters, some MDAs have no releases at all. But in one quarter, they could have up to 60% of their release come to them. So in that case, it has distorted their cycle of capital budget implementation.
Dr. Teve, the National Assembly has extended the implementation of the 2021 budget to the end of May. That's the end of this month. This is not the first time Parliament is doing this kind of extension. But does this, have implications for the country, for the economy?
The federal government budget is anchored on zero-based budgeting. So generally, the January 1st to December 31st budget cycle ordinarily should be sufficient to implement any project without having any reason of abandoned project argument or neglecting project in that case. That's because based on the zero-based budgeting system, where a project stops, you simply stop, roll it over to the next year, and you evaluate based on needs and just continue. So the attitude of extending the budget cycle to March and then to May 31st, especially as it comes to capital, regarding the capital component, makes it a bit confusing to understand whether the federal government is actually using zero-based budget or not. We have no problem as Nigerians. We just want the project to be completed. But the federal government has been drumming that their budgeting system is anchored on zero-based budgeting. Zero-based budgeting means wherever you stop in the housing project, stop there. For the next fiscal year, evaluate based on needs assessment. You allocate the amount that is required to get to completion and continue. So why I'm drumming this distortion in terms of the budget calendar is that moving capital projects to March and then to May distorts the financial flow and the financial calendar of private sectors. Private sector depend on public sector. Public sector also depend on private sector. Everybody has an accounting period. So by the time you allow recurrent to run from January to December and then capital from January to May, it becomes confusing how to even prepare Auditor General's report on project completion. Public Account Committee report also becomes distorted. You don't even know which period to which period the report should cover. The Office of the Accountant General keeps detailed record about budget releases, utilization, and for all MDs. If you go to the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation today to get data for budget implementation, it's difficult to get the data as at 2021 today or as of 2022 because of all these distortions in capital budget implementation and expansion in the date. So we are in 2022 fiscal year, but the complete Office of Accountant General or the Federation's report you can get about budget implementation will be for third quarter 2021 because it's difficult to get for the full year. And even that third quarter 2021 that you are getting is dominantly for recurrent. The capital aspect of it will be very scanty because a larger part of it has been rolled over up to May 2022. So that it's really important. President Muhammadu Buhari has already tried to ensure that in his time, we stayed strictly on January 1st to December 31st budget passage. And the budget cycle from preparation, enactment, implementation to oversight or auditing or monitoring and evaluation all needs to happen within a year. So we need to stay strictly on this January 1st to December 31st budget calendar.
It's well known that the country is grappling with revenue shortages, and this was further brought to the fore recently when President Buhari wrote to the National Assembly seeking an amendment of the MTEF to reflect a reduction in the target for crude oil production per day because of illegal refining of crude oil and bunkering in the country. What are the solutions to these problems?
Leakages in the oil sector it depends on regional and regional politics. To address this idea of leakage, to be able to meet up our crude oil production quota, there need to be peace in the oil producing region. And to ensure that there's peace there, it's not something you want to do with all-out military approach, because you want to be careful not to hurt the peace and stability of the country. So for the government, it's like you know that your child is taking his own juice that he will use for school on Monday, on Saturday. So you're trying to get the child not to do so that the child will know that he or she needs it on Monday. So it's a tricky one. Government knows what to do to halt this whole idea of loss in crude oil production. But the approach is one that the approach government will always favor is one that is trouble-free, crisis-free, one that has to do with talking, advocacy, and engagement, so that we can meet our crude oil production quota. But one thing the government can learn from itself is that we can now say that what we call illegal refinery is almost in every state that produces oil. So it's important for government to support states that are into modular that have invested into modular refineries. Modular refineries have the capacity to produce smaller quantity of crude oil on a daily basis. Edo State is already doing something like that. So government needs to support these states so that they can set up modular refineries. When state modular refineries increase, in my thinking, it will wipe out the space for illegal refineries to operate, because they are struggling, they are fighting for that space with state government. So we need to, the way we have small businesses in other sectors, you have very big businesses, but you have small and medium scale enterprise as well. So modular refineries are is the small scale and medium enterprise context for the oil sector. Then for the non-oil again, like I was saying earlier, agriculture plays a huge role in our revenue. But insecurity is affecting the peace and stability that is needed for the farmer in Jos to farm, for the farmer in Castena to farm his pepper, the farmer in Jos to farm his tomatoes, the guys in Benue to farm their yams, the ones in Ekiti as well, all over. All 36 states of the Federation and FCT have something they produce. But in every rural area right now, one form of insecurity or the other is either hampering their ability to farm, or multiple taxes from local government tax system to states, people blocking their trucks and harvest along the road to impose taxes on them. These are some of the issues affecting our non-oil revenue. So just like President Muhammadu Buhari said in 2015, we still need oil revenue to diversify away from oil. Oil still remains Nigeria's biggest cash revenue generating source. But there are other sources that we can use to gain revenue that we can use for capital. For example, ensuring efficient management of the overhead component of the recurrent component can also release money for capital. Reducing cost of governance, ensuring that projects are well costed and the right size of fund is allocated. All these things are things that can be done to free up resources for capital. Blocking leakages in revenue, blocking leakages in all these tax avoidance issues, people paying tax but the person collecting is not remitting. These are the issues they need to also tackle. Then federal government, just like states, generates revenue. For states, we call it internally generated revenue. A state like Lagos State, through its Lagos State Inland Revenue Services, has been able to raise taxes higher than it does for internally generated revenue. For federal government, it's called federally generated revenue. And MDAs, there are ministries, departments, and agencies that are revenue generating agencies. Government also needs to follow them to ensure that what they generate is also being transparent, efficiently reported, and remitted the way it should. I'm not saying that they are not, but we're just saying that these are sources that government can strengthen its fiscal management to free up resources for capital projects, because Nigeria as it is right now has a very vibrant public sector. And public sector, we are talking agriculture, we are talking education, we are talking health. These are sectors that you really need to fund. In fact, if you look at the way Nigeria is funding health, education, and the public sector in general, it is still less compared to what is recommended if you follow studies by the Public Service Institute and even International Labour Organization. So there's a lot of revenue that we can get to fund capital. Government should go all out to implement its own policies, including the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, including the 2021 Fiscal Financial Act, I beg your pardon, and all other plans that the government has, including the National Development Plan.
Now, this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.